Now let's shift to the U.S., where health officials are warning that parts of the country will face a devastating week as the death toll from the virus mounts. CGTN's Nathan King joining us from the White House. Nathan, New York could see the peak of the virus cases sometime this week, right?
They could, although it could go into next week or beyond. We don't really know. I just want to bring you up to date with what's going on right now, by the way. US President Trump is talking right behind me here at the briefing room. The daily coronavirus task force briefing is underway, and as is his wont, he tends to talk for quite a while before we get down to the nitty-gritty. He's been extremely hopeful, considering the dark turn that the numbers are taking here. And by the way, he did pay tribute to UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and wished him well. But you're right about New York. You know, it just goes to show how difficult this thing is when you actually see signs of hope from when you had 630 deaths at the end of last week every day to 590 now. But there is hope from Andrew Cuomo, the New York governor, and others that the numbers may be plateauing and reaching some sort of apex, because if they don't, the healthcare system, which is already badly stretched, could be overwhelmed. There is also this debate within the White House about whether to look at the light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, it's very dark when you're in that tunnel, or to be a bit more realistic, considering we could see thousands of deaths a day coming up. And Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's probably the premier medical advisor on the coronavirus task force, is warning of dark days ahead.
Things are going to get bad, and we need to be prepared for that. It is going to be shocking to some. It certainly is really disturbing to see that, but that's what's going to happen before it turns around. So just buckle down, continue to mitigate, continue to do the physical separation, because we got to get through this week that's coming up, because it is going to be a bad week.
A bad week, but the U.S. president is really still, and as I speak, I was just listening in again. He's really harping on about hydroxychloroquine, this untested really treatment, which is an anti-malarial and lupus drug that had shown some successes in Wuhan and France in a very small setting, but it hasn't had clinical trials. Day after day after day, he's gone out and sort of pushed this and said, look, what have you got to lose? I'm no doctor, but I've got good feelings about it. And it's created a little bit of a schism here in the White House. A little bit might be an understatement, with his advisors sort of arguing with healthcare professionals about whether to use it or not. Now, it has got an emergency okay to be used, but at a doctor's discretion. But there are real fears, especially with people with underlying heart problems and others, that it could backfire. And India, meanwhile, a big exporter of the drug, has actually said we're not exporting anymore. So that's leading to all sorts of supply questions. And there's evidence that lupus patients and people who need it for other reasons are having trouble finding it. So that's quite incredible, isn't it?
Sure is. And Nathan, China's U.S. ambassador wrote a New York Times op-ed piece on Sunday, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you know, New York's the epicenter, and everyone reads the New York Times. And, you know, let's face it, Shui Qiankai, the Chinese ambassador to the U.S., has been more one of the voices of moderation in this whole crisis, especially when Washington and Beijing were sort of finger-pointing. He knows this country well. He was educated here, and he had some things to say, especially on the back of that G20 call last week with Xi Jinping. Let me read you a couple of things he said. President Xi Jinping has stressed to President Trump the importance of solidarity between the two countries. And then he goes on to say, test kits, protective masks and medical equipment are being sent to the U.S. as well as other countries. And that sort of stresses the huge sort of air effort that's been happening, organized behind the scenes here at the White House, to bring more and more supplies in from China as they can. As you know, publicly, New York governor thanked China, Jack Ma, Joe Tsai from Alibaba, about that, but it's a huge effort behind the scenes. It's not always publicized, because obviously the US is trying to show its ramp up of domestic production for information purposes here in the US, but it's a sign that the finger pointing is over and the cooperation is beginning.
Nathan King at the White House for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.